Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session on resilience and living with a long-term condition. My name is Libby. I'm a physiotherapist by background, and over the last 15 years or so now, I've worked with people living with a variety of different long-term conditions. And I guess over the last 6 years or so, working with people with multiple sclerosis. So my connection to cardiomyopathy is through my sister, who has hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And over the last year or so, I've been working as a change maker for the charity, which is where I met my fellow change maker, Andy, and my co-pilot for today. So Andy, perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Libby. Good morning, everyone. My name's Andy. I have dilated cardiomyopathy plus some arrhythmias. I was diagnosed about 10 years ago. I have an ICD. I've had some appropriate shocks. And after all that, I thought it's about time I gave something back. So I also joined the Changemaker program. And I'm here today just to help Libby with some of the patient perspective viewpoints.
Thanks, Andy. So I thought we'd start by having a little look at what we're going to cover today. So I think it's important to think about the impact of living with a long-term condition. And then to spend a little bit of time thinking about resilience. And, what does that really mean? I think we hear that word a lot these days, but do we really know what that means for us? And then a little bit about what we can do to build our resilience. And Andy and I want to sort of share and discuss our experiences, but we also want to hear from you. So if you have any questions or any comments that you'd like to make, please do share them with us. I think there's an ask a question box. I think it's in the top right hand corner. So please do that. And we'll hope to answer those questions at the end of the session. So the impact of living with a long-term condition, I think it's fair to say that really it affects just about every area of life, I think, if you have a condition like cardiomyopathy. So there are the obvious things like, the symptoms that you live with, such as fatigue and breathlessness and chest pain, and the way that those symptoms limit your ability to do things in life. So I think there's a big physical burden of a long-term condition. And the other thing I think is that there's a huge emotional burden of living with a condition like cardiomyopathy. And I've just picked out a few things here. These are obviously not the only things, but, a fear of the future. So what's the prognosis? What's my prognosis? And what's my future going to look like? And I think a part of that is a sense of loss. So a loss of control, really. So this perhaps isn't the life that I was expecting. I didn't expect things to turn out this way. And maybe slightly more subtle emotional burden is the loss of identity. So, who am I? Who am I with this condition? What's my new normal going to look like? And all of those things affect relationships. So whether that be family dynamics, so questions like, can I still provide for my family? Will my family need to care for me? Or will I become a burden to my family? And then, relationships with friends and loved ones, will I be seen as the sick person? Am I the person who can't do things because of my condition? I can't play sport, or, I can't run up the stairs like everyone else does. And a big part of this, I think, is our occupation. So, will the cardiomyopathy affect my ability to do my job? And if it does affect my ability to do my job, how will I pay the bills? If I can't work, how am I going to pay the bills? And then again, slightly more subtly, but who am I without my professional identity? And then a few practical things here. I've put, what if I can't drive? I think having a driving license taken away from you has a big impact on everyday life. And then again, if I have a defibrillator or a pacemaker, is that going to limit what I can do? So I think, the impact of a long-term condition is huge. And Andy, I think this is probably a good time to check in with you, really, and say, is this something that, does this resonate with you? And can you perhaps, share an example of how your cardiomyopathy has impacted you since you were diagnosed?
I think there's some great points there, and I'm sure other people watching today will suddenly be sitting up looking at those going, yeah, that's me. Occupationally, yes, it did mean that I had to stop and readdress things and look at my career path. Luckily for me, it's towards the end of my sort of normal career path, but I did have to make a radical change. I think the key word is adapt. Keep going, adapt. As to a professional identity, perhaps that adage that you're always replaceable. So just think about you first and keep going. Practically, you're right. Driving, if you have a shock with an ICD, that does usually mean, for me, it was a 6-month ban. And yeah, that is hard. You don't realize just how much you rely on a car and freedom, but it does open other doors. I perhaps joke, but sitting on a bus, you do meet some fantastic people. So adapt, learn how to live with it, and keep going.
Fantastic. Thanks, Andy. Just to say, Andy, I can't actually see you anymore. I don't know why that is, but you've disappeared from my screen. So I'm sorry if I'm making funny faces.
Well, I'm still here. I'm hoping people can still see me. So my camera is on. I think I'm probably getting urgent messages from the tech team if it wasn't working. So keep going.
All right, great. So I thought I'd just add this slide in because I think this is a really helpful slide. It's a really nice graphic just to show how much time living with a long-term condition takes up, and how little of that time is spent with healthcare professionals. So this particular patient is a neurological patient. She has Parkinson's disease. And if you can see that little red dot in the top there, that represents 1 hour. And that's the hour that she spends with healthcare professionals in any given year. That 8,765 is about the hours in a year. And the rest of the time, so all of those blue dots are the time that she spends managing her condition on her own or with her family. And in managing that condition, there are many things to deal with. So dealing with complex symptoms, you might be dealing with, medication regimes and lifestyle changes, and the possibility of an increasing disability. And I think all of these things have a huge impact on quality of life. So it's important for us to learn strategies to be able to self-manage these challenges. Which brings us to resilience. So what does that actually mean? As I said at the beginning, I think resilience is a word that we hear a lot of these days, and it's talked a lot about in the press and in the media. But what does that mean for those people like yourself and like Andy and like my sister who are living with cardiomyopathy? Well, if I do a quick Google search, these are the kinds of things that come back. So it's the ability to bounce back, being strong in adversity, whatever that means. And then there's the concept that it's a personality trait. So it's something that you either have or you don't have. And I don't know about you, but that kind of makes me feel a little bit like that, stiff upper lip, keep calm, carry on. So I work in research, so I like my definitions. So if I go to the medical literature and have a look and see what that says about a basic search of long-term condition and resilience, yet again, we get these words of sort of bounce back. So resilience is our ability to bounce back from life's challenges and the ability to use personal qualities. So again, we're thinking about traits, and my personal favorite here are constellation of characteristics. that enables individuals to adapt. So there's a concept of adapting, and then also using those characteristics enables you to protect yourself from potentially negative stresses of everyday life. Now, again, I don't know about you, but that makes me feel a little bit like that. What the heck does that mean for someone trying to live with cardiomyopathy? So I think this is a really helpful quote, and I think it's helpful because it focuses on what we can do. So it's something resilience is something that we do rather than something that we have inherently. And actually, it's not static. So it's something that we continuously learn to do. And what can we do to develop some resilience? So I'm just going to give a brief overview here before we go into 2 or 3 points about what we can do to build resilience. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that this is a personal journey. We don't react to stressful or traumatic life events in the same way. None of us do that. So what works for me, what works for Andy, may not work for you. So the important thing is to have a variety of approaches that you can use and find out which one works best for you. So if we think about what approaches we can take to develop resilience, I think one of the most important things that we can do is to create supportive relationships. So seek out, maintain and develop good relationships with close family, friends, loved ones. And as Andy wisely said to me yesterday, trawl widely for these relationships, because it might not necessarily be the people who are closest with you that create that support system for you. So don't limit yourself in terms of the people that you speak to and share and have, supportive relationships with. And I think it's important to accept help from people who care about you. So having people that will listen to you and be there for you no matter what really helps to build resilience. And looking for peer support networks, hearing from other people who have the condition and hearing their stories and sharing with others. And I'm sure Andy will agree with this, but I think being a supporter is a really good way to build your own resilience. So we all know that when we help somebody, it feels good. It's nice to be able to help somebody. And I think if we can share understanding and experience with other people with the condition, that can be really helpful for our own levels of resilience. So Andy, again, supportive relationships, is that something that's helped you in your cardiomyopathy journey?
Definitely. We talked about this trawling widely and making use, gather as many friends as you can in this journey. It's very important. And I think accepting help and also accepting your condition is perhaps the key point to the journey. I noticed a question that came in from a nurse, Emma, who has trouble helping patients who won't acknowledge their condition. People can't really help you if you don't acknowledge that condition that you've got. So the starting point is to say, okay, here I am, this is what I have, now what can I do? And that's when you'll find the relationships start building and you can gain the help that you need. On your slide there, Libby, the one about using the peer support networks, I would urge everyone to dive into the CMUK website. Suck out as much as you can from it. It's a great website. It's a great organization. There are people there. There is information there to help all of us. And I think Alison's coming on later to talk more about techniques. Tune in and listen to Alison.
Thanks, Andy. That's really great. So just going to move my slide. So the second thing that I wanted to pick out today in terms of approaches that we can take to developing resilience is really involve yourself in meaningful activities. And what do I mean by a meaningful activity? Again, I think this is a really personal thing, but what is it that you enjoy doing? Think about the things in life that give you pleasure, and engage in those activities, things that you enjoy, things that you find relaxing. That's what I mean by a meaningful activity. And of course, that will be different for each one of us. I think it's important to try and pay attention to your own needs and feelings, and listen to your own inner dialogue, so that you can learn to identify when unhelpful thoughts and feelings creep in. I think sometimes the mental noise of living with a condition like cardiomyopathy can sometimes become quite overwhelming. And being able to have strategies to hand that you can turn to when that volume increases is really, really helpful. And Professor Carl White's just talked about exercise, and I think it's important to say again, exercise within the limits of your ability, and obviously having had a discussion with your cardiologist. And I think perhaps sometimes it's useful to think of exercise in terms perhaps of activity rather than exercise. I know, a lot of people think, exercise, it's about going to a class, it's about pumping iron down the gym. But I think if we can try and incorporate activity into everyday life, it really helps, because I think, the evidence is clear that, exercise helps not only your heart health and your general health, but also your mental health. So I think it's important to make the distinction, I think, between, exercise. Yes, it's important to exercise, but don't think that, if you're not going to the gym and you're not playing sport every 2 minutes, that you can't be active. You can add activity into your daily life. And I think, final thing to say on this slide is really get involved with people who share your passion. So if you have a passion for something, seek out other people who have the same passion. Keep the balance, because I think it helps in terms of living with a long-term condition. I've mentioned that the noise and the time-consuming way it can sort of take over life. If you have a passion that you can turn to and people who share that, I think that really helps to balance out and keep the balance, and keep a little bit of that identity as well about who you are with a condition. Because like I say, I think a condition like cardiomyopathy can take up all of your mind space on occasion, and it's useful, I think, to use these passions, use these meaningful activities to create some balance. So Andy, you and I know, are both keen gardeners. But what do you find are meaningful activities for you?
Okay, I think I can just sort of pick out from a couple of your bullet points there. Yes, the natural world for me, and walking in the woods, working in the garden, spending a couple of hours on my allotment, that's my escape. So find your escape and engage in it. A second one, exercise. My wife and I actually went and bought some e-bikes yesterday, and we rode them home. And I have to tell you, the smile on our faces was akin to 2 6-year-olds at a birthday party. So have a go. You can exercise, and e-bikes look as if they're going to be another part of our life. And then thirdly, perhaps walk in different worlds. Try something totally different. A couple of months ago, I went on an introduction to creative writing. Never thought of doing it before, but it was a fantastic day. So see if you can find something else to tune into.
Andy, you never said you could have written this presentation.
Clearly not, looking at the skill on today's evidence. No, I'm a long way short.
Thank you, too kind. Thanks, Andy. That's really great. Sorry to interrupt you there. I think talking about exercise and Andy and you know, going out on an e-bike, I just wanted to say a little bit about pacing. And I'm aware that I have to be slightly careful talking to cardiac patients about pacing. So I'm not talking about what your pacemaker does if you have a pacemaker. I'm talking about the ability to manage the fatigue that inevitably comes with a condition like cardiomyopathy. And I know, I think, you know, from my sister's perspective, that fatigue is a huge issue in managing sort of everyday life. So I thought it might be interesting just to quickly touch on pacing and what it's all about. So pacing is basically a management strategy. So this isn't going to change your fatigue. It's just going to help you manage it and learn ways to sort of balance time spent, you know, for Andy on the e-bikes, you know, and to then not overdo it. So I think the first really important point about pacing is to say stop before you overdo it. Structure what you do. And I always talk about the 50% energy rule, and people always say to me, Libby, how on earth can I know when I've reached 50% of my energy? And it's really difficult. It's very, very difficult to know how to do that. But I think, you know, one way is to listen to your internal cues. So your body will tell you when it's getting fatigued, and you need to rest at that first sign of fatigue. You need to rest, because the aim of pacing is to manage the boom and the bust. So you may, you know, wake up one morning feeling like you've got all the energy in the world, and you know, I'm going to change the world today, you know, this is great. And then 24 hours later, you're completely pooped and can't move. So that is the boom and the bust of pacing. And that's what we're trying to avoid by using these pacing strategies and only using a percentage of any energy that you have in the day. And one really simple way to do that is to switch activities. So changing activities that use kind of different muscles. So we talk about, you know, physical challenges. You know, it might just be, you know, doing the housework, you know, and you hoovering and you think, oh, you know, beginning to feel tired. At that moment, stop and either rest or switch your activity to something that is more cognitive, so something that's more mental, and will use a different set of muscles to the physical challenge. So I think switching between those two different types is a really good way to pace activity. And then finally, yeah, I know some people find it really helpful to track their activity. So keep a note of what you do over time and how you feel afterwards, because pacing is not a static activity. It's something that will change over time. And I think it's sometimes helpful to be able to look back and see, well, what did I do on that day? And is that the reason why I feel so fatigued today? So I hope that's helpful. I just thought I'd put a little bit in about pacing, because I know fatigue is a big issue. And I think, you know, Andy, again, turning to you, is this, so do you pace? Is this something that you do, and do you find it helps you?
Definitely. So if I'm up the allotment deep digging, they'll look across and say, why is that bloke leaning on his spade a bit more often than normal? Because I can't dig any faster or any deeper. I have to rest, and actually it just gives you a chance to stop and think about things. And I've got over that problem of I must get on and do it. It gets done a bit slower, gives you a chance to watch the world. Talking about the bikes, I woke up this morning thinking, wow, did I do too much yesterday on the first bike ride? And you can assess and think, yep, nope, those muscles don't feel too strained. The heart's okay. The pulse didn't go too high. Right, we'll go back in a couple of days' time and try again.
Cool. Thanks, Andy. So my final approach really for developing and building resilience is really to forge a positive mindset. I think again, it's easy for me to sit here and say, you need to have a positive mindset, but I think, nurturing a confidence in your own ability to solve problems, and to trust your instincts is a really good way of building resilience when you're dealing with a long-term condition like cardiomyopathy. I think it's fair to say, some of us are natural pessimists, some of us are natural realists, people would say, but I think the ability to be positive in your mindset, and perhaps to avoid seeing crises as they come up as insurmountable problems. So one way of doing that is to consider how you've dealt with previous events in life. It'd be quite unusual, I think, to get through life without having one or two bumps along the way. And you will have dealt with those crises. Look back on that and note down the strategies that you learned, and use those strategies and apply that to your current situation. So I think, try not to see things as insurmountable. Trust your instincts and trust that you've done this before, and nurture a confidence in your ability to deal with these things that life will throw at you. And I think finally, just that the ability to keep things in perspective. So, and again, as I say this, I know that this isn't easy, but consider the longer term perspective. So if you think, what's happening to you now, how will that look and feel in 1 year, 18 months, 2 years time? And try and avoid catastrophizing over, what's happening right now. So I hope that doesn't sound preachy. I don't mean it to. I think it's a difficult thing to be positive sometimes when life seems to be working against you. But I think it's a really important skill to try and remain positive, and to trust your instincts and have a confidence in your own ability to solve problems. And I'm going to bring Andy in again, because Andy, you always appear to me to be a very positive person. Am I right in thinking that? Or, would you say you had a positive mindset?
Generally, yeah, I think it's glass half full, but there's good days and there's bad days. So I would say on a bad day, go to your happy place as quickly as you can. So for me, that's walking and getting outside in nature. Build slowly, take the first hour, then the first half day, then the day, then the month. Build yourself back up to a good position. And I would say lean on that peer support again. Find the CMUK people. We're going through it. We've probably got a similar pathway. Ask for help. That's how you can help yourself.
Fantastic, Andy. I would pick up on that as well. I think it's really good to know that the support is out there from Cardiomyopathy UK. There's a lot of support available. So I would second that. Please do reach out on that front.
And I would add, if you're thinking about in the early days, it was quick dive into Google and see all the horror stories about cardiomyopathy. There is so much going on in terms of research and medication. I'm nearly 10 years into my pathway now, and things have improved dramatically. So keep the faith, keep going. It's getting better. Yeah,
it's fantastic. I absolutely agree with you, Andy. That's really good to hear. And I just put this slide up because I think I just want to acknowledge with everyone who's listening that it's very easy for me to sit here and to tell you what I think is the way to become resilient. And I just wanted to acknowledge that this is not an easy process. It's not easy to build these skills. And what Andy and I share with you today, these are just our tips and they're our experiences. It's not gospel truth, but just to acknowledge that we understand this is not an easy process, but also to say that it's a continual process. So resilience isn't something that you suddenly have. You don't wake up one morning and say, all right, I'm resilient now. There will be episodes in life, things that will happen with your condition. Your condition will change over time. And that will put pressure on you at different times where you'll need to fall back on these techniques for building resilience. So it's a continual process of understanding, managing the condition, and then growing with the condition. But as I say, there will be periods where, the condition will change, and you may revert back to a period of trying to understand what's happening again, and managing that. So just to say, absolutely understand that this is not easy, and it is a process, rather than an end in itself. And you may have come across this analogy before. I think it's a really helpful analogy to think about the jam jar. So the idea is that we all have a jam jar. This comes from the world of mental health, this analogy, but we all have a jam jar. And you can't you can't shrink your jam jar. And the jam jar fills up over time, and it fills up with what are called vulnerability factors. So as Andy helpfully said yesterday, these are the things that we can't control. And then there are things that we can control. So in our jar, we have, the things that we can't control. So that would be the genetics. I guess this is going back to the trait, am I naturally a positive person? Am I naturally a negative person? So those things that we can't change. And then on top of that, in the jar, we have sort of environmental factors. So these are the things that happen to us over life. And that sometimes if that gets too much, so the noise, again, of living with a condition like cardiomyopathy, if your jar gets full, then that's the point at which you begin to be vulnerable to not being too well. So whereas we can't shrink this jar, we can grow the jar. So, and we do that by effectively putting protective rings around the jar to make the jar bigger. And we fill that with the things in life that we can control. So going back to what we've talked about with having supportive relationships in your life, and carrying out meaningful activities. So the things that you love, the things that feed you as a human being, make sure that you make time to fill your jar with as many of those things as you can, because they are the protective factors. We all have this underlying level of vulnerability, but we can fill our jar with these protective factors of the things that we love, so that we're more protected against the potential for not feeling too great. This is a really difficult thing to sort of show in a graphic. So I thought really the best way for me to do this is to draw my own. I would challenge you to do this. It's actually a really good thing to do, to try and actually put together your own jam jar. So if we look down here at the bottom, I've got the genetics, nice pink dots down here. This is the genetic predisposition. And then, the green life experiences. These are the things that we can't control, our life experiences. But this orange section here and these are the bits that we fill our jar with, that are the protective factors, the things that we love doing that protect us against things getting too much. So for me, this is my personal jar. So I think about, spending time with family and with loved ones. And I think, again, for me, I love what I do for my work. So work is an important part of my sort of mental well-being for me. And that it's important that I have that in my jar. And again, whether that is paid work or unpaid work, it's an important filler of what feeds me in my jar. So again, hobbies, activities, Andy and I, again, keen gardeners, that sort of thing. And I think, again, for me personally, an hour of playing the piano is pure magic for me. And again, that's very personal, but it's something that I absolutely love doing. It's something that I can't imagine actually not being able to do that. And it's something that really, really works for me. So, I would challenge you to do this. It's quite a fun thing to do, and it's interesting to think about what it is. And I guess in a way, planning for those times, this is one of those strategies that you can have in place for when life sort of hits you sideways. You think, okay, I need to think about my jar, and I need to think about what I'm going to put in my jar. What's there that I need to fill it up with the things that protect me mentally. So just to say again, I just want to reiterate that this is a personal journey. My journey as a supporter of someone with cardiomyopathy, and Andy's journey as somebody with cardiomyopathy, it's going to be different. Everyone's experience is different, but the important thing is to try and different methods of managing, how you manage the condition and to build resilience. So try different methods, find something that works for you. And just a final word about support that's available from the charity. So I think both Andy and I are really keen to say to you, that the charity is there for all manner of support. The brand new website is an absolute treasure trove of really, really good, reliable information resources. So do seek that out. And I think, other things that I've listed here. So the nurse helpline, having the ability to just pick up the phone and speak to a healthcare professional really about anything is possibly quite unique. And I think it's a really valuable way that the charity can support you. And of course, there are regional support groups and telephone peer support as well. So if you're somebody that thinks I'm not really a support group type of person, that's not really me. The charity have people who are available to speak to you on the telephone so that you can have a one-to-one conversation. And of course, over COVID, when we've all been, stuck at home and not able to get out so much, the weekly online coffee and catch-up sessions, I think, and these are ongoing as well, have been a real source of support and joy, I think, for many people. And I guess finally, a word just to say, get involved. There are many, many opportunities to volunteer with the charity. Get involved, give back. I think it really helps. I think it's certainly helped me to get involved and give something back. So I really hope that's helped today. I want a big thank you to Andy. Andy, I'm sorry I can't see you, but thank you very, very much for sharing those pointers with us and for sort of fleshing out the talk, really, because I think it's important to hear from people who actually have the condition. So I'm really grateful to Andy for his help in doing that today and doing it so brilliantly, Andy.
Oh, you're welcome.
So I think that concludes our presentation. So Andy, I'm a little bit blind over here, but I've got my spare laptop.
Okay.
We've got some questions, I think.
There are a couple. I think we tried to answer the one that came in from Emma, which says, how can I as a nurse support people with cardiomyopathy who don't want to acknowledge their condition? Usually I speak with the spouse or loved one who is concerned. For me, that comes back to the individual, to the patient, and saying, actually, I do have this condition now. I know it's awful. It's a bolt from the heavens when it first happens. But please, if you can, acknowledge your condition, acknowledge what you've got, because that's day one. That's the first step is the hardest, isn't it? Acknowledge the condition, and then you'll find there are so many people there available to help you that you can lean on. It's very difficult if they don't know that you want that help. So acknowledge the condition and work your way out from there.
Yeah, I agree, Andy. I mean, it's a really good question, and I think it's a really tricky thing because I think, as we've just said, people deal with things in in different ways, and not acknowledging that it's actually happening to you is definitely one way that people deal with the condition. But I fully agree. I think being knowledgeable about the condition will help you and the people around you to manage it. So I think an important point from my perspective is to say that, when someone has a condition like cardiomyopathy, it's not just about the person that has it. It will affect everybody in the family, not least of which because of the genetic element to it. But I think, if you have somebody that you love in your family who's living with a condition that is, variable, like cardiomyopathy, and can change, I think it's important to acknowledge that it's not just about the person involved, and maybe thinking about how your behavior as the person with the condition is affecting the people that you love around you. Maybe that's a better way to think about it. But it's a great question, and it's a difficult situation for sure.
For some of the other questions, I think they're quite specific and need some medical input, which I don't think either you or I should give, Libby. But yes. I would certainly recommend that these questions get pinged forward to the nurse team or the individuals that have raised them. If you can get in touch with CMUK and get onto the nurse helpline, there's a few there that I'm sure the nurses could help with.
Yes, I absolutely agree, Andy. I mean, I just perhaps pick up on one question that I can now see on my laptop, which is, worries about being exposed to the virus, and any sort of tips for reducing anxious thoughts around that. And I think definitely, I would say from my own experience with people living with multiple sclerosis, that's a huge thing at the moment. And I certainly have deal with people myself who really don't go out at all anymore because they've become incredibly anxious about leaving the house. And much like cardiomyopathy, because of that, their condition has worsened over the last 18 months. And I think that also adds to the anxiety of living with a long-term condition. Yeah. So there's another one here about, actually that question just disappeared. Can you see any, Andy?
There's one there. How can we handle the guilt of passing on a defective gene?
Oh, that's a tough one.
That is a tough one, isn't it? It's one, I'll speak from experience. It is hard. I have 2 children. It was clear I had to have that discussion with them, but being very honest and very open and very upfront, I think did help. And they were able to access counselling and genetic counselling support, and their conditions, their health is now being monitored. So I think it comes back to saying the acknowledgement phase, this is where I am, this is where family members may well be. Let's try and manage what we've got. We cannot affect our genetic makeup. We're given what we're given. So how far back up your family chain do you go? You can't ever find that answer. What is try and break that cycle and see if you can accept, learn, develop, and support the wider family.
And I guess that point, Andy, about what you were just saying, you can't, you're not in control of your genetic makeup.
No.
So is that really something that you feel guilty about? I know, I think it's very true to say that people do feel guilty about it, but like you say, really, it's your genes. You can't help the genes that you have, can you? No. So I just wanted to pick up on that last question, which disappeared as I was talking about it, about anxiety about going out with the pandemic, and just briefly to say you're not alone. if you feel like that. Many people are feeling the same way, and I think it's particularly true of people that are living with conditions like cardiomyopathy. And in terms of sort of reducing those anxious thoughts, I think about ways that you can mitigate the risk. So don't just avoid going out completely, think about, where you're going to go, wearing a mask, make sure that you wash your hands, make sure that your hygiene is good, and perhaps think about places where you can go out and just avoid sort of enclosed spaces where there's not a good flow of air. But I think there are plenty of ways of getting out. But I do understand, and I have experienced it with my own patients, that actually the fear and anxiety of going out has now become overwhelming, to the point where they don't go out. So I just wanted to say, you're not alone in feeling that, but do try and think of ways that you can mitigate that risk and regain some control, I guess, in a way, in order to sort of go back out and back into society again. Andy, I think we're probably coming to the end of our time. Are there any other questions that you wanted to pick up on?
No, I think you're right. I think we've hit the time limit. So if we haven't been able to answer the questions, please come back and find a way of joining a forum, getting hold of CMUK somewhere, and let's see if we can help you over the rest of the day or in the coming weeks.
Thanks so much, Andy, and thank you everybody for listening. Thanks for your attention. I hope it's been helpful. I'm really sorry that I haven't been able to see you, and I don't think you can see me, but I hope it's been helpful and useful, and it's been a pleasure doing this session today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.